Although most people think of ghosts as the spirits of the departed, ghostly activity can mean something entirely different. In this two-part series, we're delving into different types of hauntings. In part 2, we're talking classic ghosts and the crazy, non-human variety. Welcome to Shadowland, everybody.
Welcome.
This is a podcast that shines a spotlight on stories of the supernatural, mysterious, eerie, and unexplained. Stuff like zombies,
Astral projection,
guardian angels,
ghost sex,
auras,
wendigos,
black holes,
creepypasta,
alternate dimensions,
Nessie,
dark matter,
Atlantis,
dreams,
underground cities,
ghost ships.
giants. Ooh, I want to do giants.
Let's do giants.
All right. All kinds of stuff like that.
Is that a thing?
It is a thing.
I guess we'll find
Sure.
out.
Yeah, we'll find out. But yeah, all kinds of stuff like that. And so, I'm Seth Jablon.
I'm Christina Callery, and this is part 2 of our haunted series.
That's right. Our Spooktober,
Part of Spooktober.
special, which is categories of paranormal phenomena, right?
Ghosts.
Ghost
kind of.
phenomena. Categories of ghost phenomena. So yeah, in case you didn't hear part 1, maybe I'll just do a review of how we're talking about this. So basically, we're trying to create just a categorization for ghost phenomena, right? Very often, phenomena that we can't explain often gets lumped together as, well, that's just a ghost, and while I think our point of view on this podcast is that ghosts may exist, but it's not always what we think it is. And so we've given some categories to help us sort of tease it apart and really understand this phenomenon, how it can interrelate and what's actually happening. And so so for the first category, we're calling that atmospheric activity. And so this is a lot of electromagnetic fields, St. Elmo's fire, ball lightning, stuff like that. Very, very stuff that has something to do with, weather or light or things like that can cause odd lights, disturbances, in time and perception, stuff like that. And then category 2 is the first category we're talking about, what we call poltergeist activity. And while poltergeist activity could certainly be in really all 3 of the next few categories, this is ones that are often looked at as being connected to or the result of some type of emotional disturbance with a person, right? And so maybe this is some sort of stray telekinetic energy. Maybe there is an interaction with something else supernatural, but it has a very specific quality to it. It might be something that, is perceived as, malevolent or at least mischievous. Objects get thrown around the room, stuff like that.
There's a lot of stuff flying around.
A lot of stuff flying around.
Poltergeist.
Yeah. Like that was that CCT. Oh, I want to do like a CCT episode. There's that one where it's some store in England somewhere, and just a box of tea levitates off one of the shelves and just hangs there for a few minutes before it falls to the floor. And just weird stuff.
Just for no reason.
For no reason, yeah.
Just
So then category 3 is what we call echoes or residual energy of human activity, right? So this isn't some type of ghost where, it has its own sort of intelligence or, it's some sort of whole entity that's sort of out there, but it's simply, the energetic residue of human life, right? And very often that can, be because of intense suffering or, very often with sickness and disease, tuberculosis, hospitals, being a hotbed of, ghost activity. But also just, places that people really loved, right? There's hotels that, people just wanted to, love those places so much that it created something was left behind.
So it's like some kind of imprint or an echo. It's not a consciousness.
Yes, right. And then category 4, which we're going to talk about today, is human souls. And this is, again,
these are your classic ghosts.
Classic ghosts, right? And so, but this is also still a wide range, right? These could be, I think even this category kind of is divided into like one being spirits that simply did not go into the light, right? For whatever reason. It could have just been attachment to the earth or again, some type of like suffering or unfinished business can cause these souls to stick around. But it can also be as simple as the visitation of someone who's, passed on, right? And a lot of people have, including myself, experiences with this, right? And they could be in dreams, they could be in person. There's lots of ways that can manifest. So it's not always a bad thing. But I think, that sort of like represents the wide range, I think, of this category, which we will talk about in a second. And then category 5 is what we're calling non-human entities. And this is probably the most misunderstood and wide-ranging of the group. But we'll get into all that shortly. But first, so human souls. So like I said, there's a lot of different examples of that. I have one. Did you want to go first? Or you want me to go first here?
I can go first.
Okay, why don't you go for it?
Sure. I've got like 2 stories.
Oh, okay, awesome.
And one is actually a personal story.
Oh,
it comes via a couple friends.
Okay.
So the first story, though, I'm a ginger, and so I thought maybe doing a ginger ghost would be cool.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So this is the red-headed hitchhiker of Route 44.
Cool.
Okay. So, for a very long time, people who live near Rehoboth, Massachusetts, have been reporting the ghostly apparition of a red-headed man hitchhiking along Route 44. So, the stories all have the same basic pattern, and there are only slight variations. People describe him as being middle-aged, somewhere between 45 and 55, well-built, about 6 feet tall. He's got kind of longish red hair and like a beard. And he's either spotted hitchhiking, walking in the middle of the road, or is creepily walking into the woods on the side of the road. He's always seen wearing a red flannel shirt with either jeans or brown work pants and work boots. Sometimes people say that he's like well kept, but at other times he's got more of a disheveled looks, or his clothes are dirty and his shirt is untucked. So he likes to switch it up.
That's interesting.
I can appreciate that.
Totally. You got to keep it fresh.
Right. So he can either appear solid or transparent. But one thing that people seem to agree upon is that his eyes are described as kind of inhuman, that they have like this dark, soulless quality.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, very creepy. Okay, so I'll just start in with the story. So a number of drivers have stopped to pick him up. And basically the scenarios kind of they all have the same framework, which you'll see as we go on. Basically, people will stop for him. So he gets into the back seat, even if the passenger side is empty. He never gets into the front seat. He doesn't speak. And if the driver asks him where he's headed, he just points down the road in the direction the car is going.
Right.
Very ghostly.
Yes.
Okay. And then after they've been driving a while, the hitchhiker suddenly starts to giggle, which is creepy.
That is creepy.
And then it turns into like full-on laughter. And then it turns on to just maniacal, shrill, ear-piercing laughing, which is very, very disturbing. And usually at this point, the driver is like, okay, ride's over.
Right, yeah. Totally.
And they'll threaten to pull over, and then the hitchhiker will disappear into thin air, no matter what speed the car is going. Okay, so here are some of the stories. So one woman said that he disappeared after he disappeared, she turned on the radio and she heard this crazy laughter that was transmitted through the radio.
What? Oh,
Which,
man.
and this isn't the only story that kind of brings in the radio. A man said that he was driving down Route 44 and the face of the hitchhiker appeared alongside the car. It was as it was driving around 40 miles per hour. So it was like floating alongside it.
Whoa.
As it drove. This story is pretty creepy. So there was, and this sounds like an urban legend. Okay. But let's keep an open mind. So one couple was driving in the area and broke down at around 10 o'clock at night. The woman stayed in the car while the man went to get help. As he was walking, he saw the hitchhiker on the side of the road, and so he tried to talk to him. And the hitchhiker started yelling at him and then vanished. So the guy was pretty shaken up, understandably, and starts heading back toward the car. As he walked, he heard this maniacal laughter coming from all directions around him in the woods. Just
that's
so creepy.
Yeah.
So the woman was still in the car, though, and she had her own experience. So she was listening to the radio when suddenly a man's voice took over and started taunting her. She was so terrified that she ran out of the car. Okay. So another woman, and I'm not sure why these ladies are stopping to pick him up.
Yeah, dude. When is this all happening? In the 80s when people...
I don't know. I don't know.
So,
but anyways, she pulled over, and when he reached for the door, he disappeared. And at that moment, her car battery died, and she heard a man laughing, but no one was around. So then the car started up about 10 minutes later, but by this time, she's totally freaked out. So in another instance, a man stopped for him and called out to him. The hitchhiker started walking toward him and then just slowly began fading into nothingness. Another driver saw the guy appear in his back seat as he was looking in his rearview mirror. And then the radio started to go crazy and scanning the stations, and the volume turned up, and it was so loud it shook the car. And then of course the hitchhiker disappeared. And there was the crazy laughter again. Okay, so there's a legend that says that if 3 people are driving down this road, the hitchhiker will appear and sit in the empty seat.
That sounds that does sound like some local teenager, legend or urban
right. And you would do it, of course.
I would 100% try that.
Yeah. I mean, all he does is laugh. And,
I know.
It'll kill your car battery or whatever.
Yeah.
So nobody knows who he is. Some people have speculated it's a farmer who was struck when he stopped on the side to fix a car. But the area does have a history of a number of fatal accidents. And also it's near what's known as the Bridgewater Triangle, which is new to me, but it's an area in Massachusetts that covers about a dozen small towns. And they all have a high incident of documented paranormal activity, including UFOs and strange creatures. Yes.
Kind of makes me want to go up there for the weekend.
I know, seriously, it's a good. You should. Okay, so I have a second story, and this one I can verify. 2 old friends of mine. Let's just call them Rob and Carrie. I didn't ask permission.
Okay.
Okay. So, but basically, back when I was in my mid-20s, I lived in a house with them, and there was a rotating cast of people that moved through, about 5 of us. But these were 2 of my good friends and housemates, and they're both very rational people, not superstitious. Carrie was studying anthropology at the time. She's super pragmatic, very a-religious. So, not somebody to be, making up fantastical stories at all. Okay. So, anyway, at this time, Rob was hanging out with a woman who lived with some roommates in a farmhouse outside of Ann Arbor. And it was a very rural area. During October, it kind of looks like your classic Midwestern Halloween landscape. Autumn leaves, yellowy fields with tall grass, spindly trees, pumpkin patches, the whole nine. So one day Rob had to go drop something off for his friend, and Carrie decided to go along with him for the ride. So they made the 15 or so minute drive outside of town into the countryside, and I think it was near dusk at this point. So the sky would have been growing dark, but it was warm outside, so Carrie had the car window rolled down to let in the night air. So they made it to the farmhouse, and Rob just had to run in quickly. So Carrie said that she'd just hang out in the car and wait for him. So she watched him walk up the driveway, disappear into the house. And this was before cell phones were everywhere. So she was probably, I'm guessing, either like reading something or just zoning out while she waited.
Right.
But a few minutes passed, and all of a sudden, she heard a whisper up close, like someone was leaning into the car window and speaking directly into her ear. You know that kind of like tingly chills feeling
totally.
you get when someone does that? It was like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so she automatically thought Rob was messing with her, that he'd come back and snuck up on her, and she turned to look, but no one was there. So then she looked up the driveway, and right at that moment, she saw Rob emerge from the house and start walking back toward the car, and no one else was anywhere in sight.
Yikes.
Yeah, so when he got to the car, she was super freaked out, and she's like, let's get out of here right now. So you could write this off as like an isolated incident. Maybe it was the wind or something, and it just was a spooky landscape or something, whatever. Okay, but a few weeks later, Rob went back to the house, and he's hanging out and he's making casual conversation with one of his friend's roommates there. And the guy mentioned the ghost that lived there, and he's like, wait, there's a ghost?
Yeah.
So what does it do? Didn't say anything at all about Carrie's experience. And the guy said, well, it tries to grab people when they're going up the steps. I think this is like from the basement, which is kind of like on the nose ghost behavior.
Right.
Running up the basement steps, something like that. But this is where it really gets crazy. He said it also whispers in people's ears.
Whoa. Wow, that's creepy.
Yeah.
You get like extra creeped out after like someone says that,
Yeah.
I mean, the experience is enough, like, and you're like, oh no, yeah, that's crazy. And so these were friends of yours that like that this happened to?
Two people who I trust. Yeah.
Two people you trust. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like I mean, we should trust all these stories. You know what I mean? But I feel like if I ever like saw or
well, you never know.
Like
Like if something's like an urban legend,
yeah.
It's been on Reddit and all of that stuff. But when it comes from people that it's
totally.
That's why we would love more listener stories.
Yes, more. Yes. Yeah, there's a few that I'm trying to collect right now from some friends, but yeah, it's different when it's like the person or it's just I don't know, it lends a more I don't know, meaningful credence to it, or just a more reasonable perspective, right? Where it's like, oh, this isn't something that someone's saying on a TV show, it's like, oh, this is my direct experience.
Right.
But yeah, that was good. I like that. I enjoyed that. Cool. All right. So maybe I'll tell mine now.
I want to hear yours. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's hear it.
So this is the story of Elaine Mercado and the Brooklyn haunting.
Ooh. Okay.
So this story begins in 1982 when Elaine Mercado and her husband moved into their new home in Brooklyn. So her brother had told her that he had a bad feeling about the place, but that didn't obviously stop them. It's actually like kind of a beautiful home. It's a Queen Anne style, which I didn't know what that was, but I guess, it's has sort of a Baroque appearance to it. And for Brooklyn, I mean, to own their own home, that's a big deal. So they were all pretty super excited. Right.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly where the neighborhoods, but it's farther out in more deep Brooklyn, but still, down in the basement, in the laundry room, there was these strange doors, right? They were like really high up off the ground, about 5 feet, and they only led to an unfinished part of the basement. And, it started, weird right there. But Elaine felt she was always sort of uneasy when she was around those doors. She said she felt like something was standing right behind her, watching her. right? And so that, I think at first she was just like, oh, maybe it's just, new house creeps.
Or like the basement creeps.
Basement
I used to
creeps,
get that
like
in my grandma's house as a kid.
Totally. And I mean, for people who like just lived in a Brooklyn apartment, probably pretty small, it's a different experience. But now she starts to notice more activity when she was, one time when she was in the kitchen cooking, when she heard footsteps on the stairs, which was immediately unsettling to her because she knew she was the only one in the house, right? And like in an apartment building, you might not notice that stuff as much, but when you're in a house where no one else is supposed to be, like hearing sounds like that is going to put you on edge. So she goes and checks it out, and she doesn't find anything. When she goes back into the kitchen, she hears the footsteps run down the stairs to the basement. So then she goes down there to see what's going on, and again finds nothing. So that's pretty creepy, right? Like that'll, you're like, I feel like if you had an experience like that, you'd be like, okay, well that was weird, but maybe I just kind of like your friends who are like, I don't know, it could be.
It's an old house.
It's an old house or whatever. But things are continuing to escalate. So one night, she thought she heard her daughter, Christine, calling out to her. And when she answered, her daughter answered her back, thinking that she was calling out to her, right? And then finally the voice shouted Christine's name again and then started laughing maniacally. And that's some scary shit.
The maniacal laughter.
I know, the maniacal laughter. Ugh. Like hearing a voice is one, but hearing something like laugh maniacally, that's got to be super creepy. So then another night she was in bed and she felt this pressure pushing down her entire body into the bed, right? And she can actually feel the springs compress, but she was unable to move or scream for help. And then all of a sudden it just stopped, right? But then she wasn't
asleep, so this wasn't like
Well, I mean, who knows? But like it could have been that sort of sleep paralysis, whatever.
Sleep paralysis.
But this idea that this detail of like her saying she could feel the springs compress, that's kind of creepy. She does begin having these what she calls suffocating dreams that sometimes last all night, where something is like essentially trying to suffocate her. But she kind of feels like it's something emotional with her. Again, perhaps, it's a big deal to move, right? It's a very emotional thing. So she kind of writes it off. Now one morning she heard her daughter screaming for her from her room in the basement. Her daughter lived down there. So she goes down and she sees the quilt that was on the bed being slowly pulled off and then laid out in a perfect square on the floor. And that's when Karen was like, oh, hells no, I'm moving up to the attic. Which sounds
So it's like folding the...
Huh?
It was folding the blanket?
No, it was like it pulled the blanket off the bed onto the floor and laid it out neatly in like one big square. So
she
obviously...
should be like,
huh?
Wait, she should be like, there's some dishes in the sink too.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But basically, so she moves up to the attic, which seems like an odd move to me because it's like you're going from like one scary ass place to another. But so that's where she goes.
Wait, she moves to the attic?
Yeah. Yeah. Her daughter Karen does. So like she's freaked out because she's like, something's down here. But I guess, it's a Brooklyn home. So there's not a lot of room, right? So she moves to the attic. So now when they were moving her into the attic, they found an old door that went into a storage area. And in there's this like tiny cupboard. And they find in that this sealed box. And so they open it and they find a tiny wedding dress wrapped in newspaper from 1952.
What?
Right?
What do you mean tiny?
Tiny as in for a very petite person. So not tiny like for a child or for like a doll, but like it's very small. But it's very distinctive in its size,
Whoa.
I guess.
And it's in the attic in this weird
newspaper.
Little cubby hole.
All by itself. Right. And so she felt like there was something negative about it. So she throws it out. Right. Which I think is interesting because like I feel like with so many of these stories, people are like, oh, that's cool. That's weird. Let's put this thing on the mantle. And then all hell breaks loose. Like right. At least you had the good sense to throw the fucking thing out, So, anyway, so After that, I think at some point around this time, Elaine's marriage unfortunately ends. And I think a large part of it is a result of her husband not believing her and her daughters about this phenomenon happening. And
Really?
I think, what's that?
Really?
Yeah, I feel like that's not uncommon that people have very, when one person is experiencing something and the other person doesn't believe it, that it causes this rift between them. I feel like
I think, I definitely.
I mean, probably they had other problems too, but
could see that, like religious or spiritual differences.
Maybe, but just not being believed by someone is going to make you feel, I think, isolated from them to some degree. Mm-hmm. Anyways, that was her perspective. Who knows what actually went on between them? But all in all, the activity stopped for about a year after that. But then again, eventually it did start again. And it started with the voice she had heard call out to Christine. That same voice, called out to Christine one night, right? And so I think she was home alone. So she called her boyfriend and asked him to come over. And I think he ended up staying the night or something. And he said that night he had a vivid dream of trying to open a door of a room he was in. He couldn't do it. Something was holding him back, holding him down. When he was finally able to open the door, he saw a skeleton lying on a dirt floor.
Whoa.
Yeah, which is like, that's a crazy ass dream, right? So that Halloween, they threw a party, as one does when one lives in a haunted house, apparently. And so Elaine's friend Lisa comes over, and at some point she finds her friend in the kitchen just staring down the basement stairs, looking kind of ill. And when she approached her, her friend says, "Who's that little lady?" And then she turned to her and was like, "Your house is haunted." And so that night, Christine awoke to see a figure hovering over her sleeping sister. And it was hard to make out, but she sensed it was like a woman or like a female energy of some kind, and that it was very angry. And so other phenomena that happened were things like shadowy figures scurrying along the baseboards, which, I mean, that's pretty crazy, right? Like,
when you say scurrying,
yeah.
You mean like on their like hands
just like
knees?
shadows
kind of
moving across, like as
scuttling.
Scuttling, yeah, exactly. They would see small balls of light bouncing along the ceiling. They would hear voices banging, specifically, scratching noises, and weird smells. All kinds of stuff like that. So there's a lot happening in this house, right? So this all went on till one day she was taking out the trash, and Elaine goes and asks her neighbor who had lived there before and anything odd had happened there in the house. And I honestly don't know why it took her so long to ask, but like, because I think it was like, she was there for like 10 years or something like that, or maybe longer. But yeah, and anyways, he tells her that he had known the couple that lived there previously. I think he had like babysat for them or something. He was young, but they had a son who had gotten married and moved into the attic, right? So it's like, older days, like where people would like, young couples would, sometimes live with their parents. And so they lived up in the attic together. And one interesting detail was that they would communicate with the rest of the house by banging on the heaters, right? And that was, I think, they thought that was connected sort of maybe some of the banging they heard in the house. And then now one night, his young wife, they were newlyweds, which the neighbor actually described as this tiny little thing, right? That she was very petite. She slipped and hit her head and died. And it was just one of those like freak accidents. Like, I think it was right after they got married. And, I don't know exactly what happened, but she died, in the house, and which is super creepy. And, he also made mention of her beautiful wedding dress, right? I think it was like a thing. So now Elaine's like, okay, I think I know what's going on here, right? So in February 1995, after 10 years of living in the house, over 10 years, I think she's moved there in 82, right? So that's a long time to live with this stuff.
Yeah.
But I guess when you get a house in Brooklyn, you're like, I'm sticking around.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, where are you gonna go?
So, so then she's so fed up now. She's like, so she goes to and hires a medium to figure out what this thing wants, right? So the medium arrives, and without prompting, she goes straight to the doors in the basement. She said she felt a female presence down there that was hurt and angry and confused. And it was basically, she described it as a spirit that had not gone into the light and that had since remained holed up in that dark, unfinished part of the basement. Right. Which is like super strange, super scary. Like that there's this thing that's just like, and sad, really. It's also heartbreaking, right? Like this woman, it was probably like the happiest days of her life. And then all of a sudden she's fucking dead. And she's like, I'm not going to the light. This is my house. I'm staying. Right. And so the medium spent literally hours trying to convince the spirit that it was telling her that she was dead and that she needed to go into the light. And I think finally she did. And so after that moment, the activity stopped and Elaine woke up, I think the next morning sensing that the house was lighter and that the heaviness that had been there was now gone. And it never came back.
Wow.
And I think people moved in. I think they eventually did leave. People moved in. I think there was still no activity. I think she actually wrote a book. I think the Times did a story on it. There's some like daily news stories about this as well. It was also an episode of Paranormal Witness. But yeah, I think she wrote a book about it, and I think she gave her the new tenants her book, copy of her book or something, But yeah, they said they never. So this thing went into the light and never returned.
Wow. That's so interesting. Do they know who put the wedding dress there? And like,
well, I imagine
what was the motive? I mean,
I imagine it was like probably her husband or something, or when they were like cleaning out the house, maybe that was the one thing, he couldn't part with, or maybe it was her parents, or I don't know if it was her in-laws or whatever. I guess it would have been her in-laws, but you're like clearing out some people, and I guess it's like this handmade.
Usually you would hang it and
but they're
like
moving out of the house, they're selling the
something.
house, and maybe they just.
Maybe they wanted to memorialize her.
Maybe it was something like that. I mean, it's wrapped in a newspaper from that date. Maybe there was something like that, and then they either forgot or just couldn't bear to throw it out when they moved out. But yeah, it's very interesting that this thing would be almost like time capsulized, in this house, and was still there when they moved in, of all things, right? So
Wow.
yeah, so that's the story of Elaine Mercado and the
Wow, that was
Brooklyn
great.
haunting. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so I guess we'll do our last category here, which is category 5, non-human entities, right? And I think this is, again, probably one of the more misunderstood groups, and I think it's also because there's a wide range of what this could be, and I think,
Right.
we're going to sort of like put a cap on it. I think we have some stories around like a certain set of phenomena, but I think it could go pretty far, but basically the core of it is that, I think it's like, think Midsummer's Night's Dream, right? It's some type of spirits or sprites or gnomes, like jinns, these are, they are of the earth and bound to the earth, but maybe some of them aren't. Maybe this is some categories of what, people call, poltergeists, right? They could be like different than the ones we talked about earlier.
Right. The lines are kind of blurred
The
here.
lines are blurry, right? Like it could be an actual, some type of mischievous spirit. Think forest dwellers, desert inhabitants, caves, places of the dark and the remote, rarely visited by men. I think sometimes what people call them elementals, they could be even, like I said, gnomes or
the hidden people, I think, is that another term?
Sure. Yeah. So it's all sorts of stuff
Although,
like that.
yeah, I mean, and like then you have like the straight up demonic explanation.
Right. And so then, there's a whole then category of this that I think, maybe it's even its own category, angels and demons and gods and demigods and, whatever. But I think certainly some things that we call demons would fall into this category, which is, it's sort of hard to talk about without a sort of religious connotation, but there are certainly dark versions of these things, right? Things that have clear ill will towards people and seem to sort of feed off of negative emotional energy, feed off of fear and generally just harass and hurt people as a means of, I don't know, the sort of focus of their existence, or maybe
just appear and perplex people.
Yes.
Like in my story. But.
Right. So I was just talking about like the sort of like more, what might be
the demonic one
side.
would be malevolent, but yeah.
But some of these are maybe just like, totally innocent, types of entities, but they would be non-human. They didn't used to be human souls, they're their own thing. And, who knows? Maybe
even if we don't know what that is.
Even if we don't know what that is. And who knows? Maybe they're aliens or interdimensional being. Who knows? But, so that's category 5. So maybe I'll do mine first.
Go first.
Yeah. Okay. So the story I'm going to tell is the story of Isabella Poremski and Emily. So this probably belongs to maybe the latter category that we were talking about. So the story starts with Laurel and Brian Poremski, who bought a house in Baltimore, Maryland. And when they bought it, it was, quite a bit less than it should have been, right? It was definitely below market value, which I feel like a lot of these stories start that way. Not long.
Where they're all like, "Oh, this is a great deal.
This is such a great buy.
Like, oh, we should move in here."
Totally.
Yeah.
So not long after moving in, their daughter Isabella started talking to an imaginary friend who she called Emily, and she would talk to her as if she were.
So creepy.
I know, it's so creepy. She would talk to her as if she were standing there right in front of her in the room. But, her parents didn't think too much of it as, that's something that kids do. It's not.
Did you ever do that? Did you have an imaginary friend?
I did. In fact,
you did?
I had one, like, when I started going to that performing arts school, like I went to some acting classes, but I was pretty young. I was like, but I mean, not super young, but maybe around like 10 or 11 or something like that. And they actually encouraged us to create one. So, so I had one that was sort of like born out of, an acting class I was taking as a child.
Well, that's different though. That's not like, I really believe I have this. Okay.
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, kids, when you're young, I don't know if you really see that line there so much. If it's real to you, it is real, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's the idea of an imaginary friend. But to her, this person was definitely real. Right. So in fact, one day it ended up breaking this porcelain statue. And then Isabel announced to her mother that Emily did it, and that she actually Emily did not want her mother to be there any longer. And so that's when they got creeped out and other activities started happening, right? So this one day, Isabella comes running into her mother and saying that Emily told her that her mother had hurt her in the bathtub, was her words. And this is when her parents were like, okay, maybe she needs like medical help. Maybe there's like, maybe she's troubled or there's something else going on here. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's a pretty intense thing to say, about an imaginary friend, not just like, they broke the.
She doesn't like broccoli.
Yeah. Right. So, once after returning from a family outing, they found about 20 family pictures have been taken down from the wall and piled on the living room floor. Right. Which is like, that's like straight up terrifying. Right. Like, I don't know. There's something about like, the fact that it was like family pictures and, that it was like, I feel like that's also a very poltergeisty thing to do to like, sometimes they'll do that.
Well, it shows intent. It's not just chaotic. I mean,
it's not chaotic. It's not
some poltergeist stuff is just like stuff flying around. Right. Yeah. I mean, but this is like
an intention.
Like there's an intelligence behind it, but
yeah. An intention and intelligence, and sometimes they'll do that thing where like they'll stack chairs or they'll like lay stuff out in like weird patterns. Like I find that stuff the most terrifying, but anyways, So now they're like, so that part wasn't even the one that what really freaked them out. It's that after they witness this thing, they look over at the window and they see this like stark white face looking back at them. And now they're all scared. They all see it and they're all
in the
fucking
window.
scared in the window. Right. It's like a reflection, but it's like, disembodied. So now they, a lot of stuff like this happens. I think there's like scratches and people being pushed and, all kinds of stuff happening. So I think at some point they're like, okay, you're going to go to your grandparents for the weekend and they're going to like redo the room. They decide to like redecorate her room. I don't know exactly what their logic was there, but like, I don't know, maybe the thought is that they were going to like refresh things, or maybe if there was some sort of negative energy that would disperse it.
Like anyways, the feng shui would help.
Yeah, maybe the feng shui was getting fucked up. So basically, when Isabella returns, her mother leaves her in a room for only a few minutes. And then when her mother comes in, she finds all the furniture in the room had been thrown around as if it didn't weigh anything, right? It's just like, chairs and dressers, like all sorts of stuff just like tossed about the room, but they didn't hear anything. And just like definitely stuff that like a small child couldn't have been able to do. Then later during bath time, Isabella tells her grandmother that Emily had told her to go out the window to join her. And that window is actually on the second floor. So, which freaked everyone out, right? Now they're like, okay, this thing isn't just harassing. And I think at this point, like, it was clear that they were, trying to get Emily to go away and that the daughter was like not playing with her anymore. And I think this thing was that fact was aggravating whatever this thing was. And so now it was telling her to literally jump out the window, which is like, that's terrifying. Cause like for a child, they might do it. You know what I mean? Like kids, and so basically her dad screws all the windows shut, to keep her safe. But things continue to escalate, until finally, Emily drags Isabel down a flight of stairs into the basement. Right. Ugh. I know it's horrifying.
Why is it always the basement?
Because it's dark, dude.
Because it's dark and like close to the ground.
Maybe something like
There's
that.
There's just some primal thing.
It's
where you just sort of feel that the basement is just like that Ramones song.
Well, which one?
It's like, hey, Daddy-O, I don't want to go down to the basement. There's something down there.
Maybe Joey Ramone had a haunted basement. Totally. Okay, so enough is enough, right? Like you see your kid pulled down the stairs by some entity, like you're like, fuck this. So they hire a medium to find out what to do, right? Like, to find out what this thing is and what it wants and what they can do about it. So, so then the medium comes in and right away starts singing Mary Had a Little Lamb, which was odd to them because
not creepy at all,
but also because Isabella had started singing that like a few days before. And they had not taught her the song. So the medium tells them that they need to collect all the Bibles in the house and get rid of them. So they collect up all their Bibles.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I know. At the request of this, whatever this thing was, says that it was bothering it or something. So they go and collect all the Bibles up. And
I doubled down on the Bibles. But
yeah, I know. It seems like an odd move. I was like, wait a second, so you don't like the Bibles? So why don't we just get like a big box of Bibles? So anyway, so they collect up all the Bibles. And then the medium's like, you didn't get all of them. And they're like, no, this is all the ones that we own. And she's like, it's saying it's not. So they go and like basically ransack their daughter's room and they find a Bible in there that they didn't know where it came from. Like maybe had been there previously. It wasn't one of theirs and they don't know where their daughter got it, but it was basically in her room somewhere. So now they get rid of all the Bibles. And now the medium tells them that Emily is not a she, but a he. And that she refers to it as a harpy posing as a young child and that it was actually evil.
Ugh.
Yeah. so now
I don't know. This all sounds like they're like, like giving in to like a kidnapper's demands or something. It's not.
I guess, but I mean, I think they're desperate. And I think, places like stories like this, people, especially when they're buying houses below market value and stuff, they're like, it's probably not so easy for them to move out. You know what I mean? Like they're looking at potentially taking a loss. Like and also it's like, you don't want to believe this shit. Do you know what I mean? So in a way, like they get into a place where
they're just like, okay, we'll go along with it, whatever. Yeah.
And I mean, I've heard like the San Pedro poltergeist, which we'll do a episode on that. But where people start doing the opposite, where they're like, fuck you, and like, trying to, engage the thing or threaten it or challenge it, things get way worse. So, I can understand the impulse of being like, what does this thing want? We'll just do that and maybe it will leave us alone. So, and I think it culminates with them. They're like burning a red candle for some reason. I don't know. And and it's splattered, like the entity like splatters it across the room. So now they're like, their living room's like covered in like red candle wax. And then that night, Brian, as they recount, becomes possessed by this entity and he straight up attacks his wife. She's able to escape him. And then eventually Brian comes out of this weird state that he was in. And they're like, okay, fuck this. We're done here. And they all leave. And since they left, they experienced no more activity. But the new owners resided there for only a couple months before they were forced to leave by Emily.
Oh, so they experienced the exact same things?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's housebound.
Whatever this thing is, it's attached to the house.
Wow. That is crazy.
But yeah, I feel like this was a good, like, I like this story because it's like, it's an example of that something posing as something else. And I feel like that comes up sometimes in the, in the stories with children, where it's like posing as a child and then sort of feeding off their energy. And then they find out later it's like not actually a child, and that like insidiousness is pretty scary to me. And
it's terrifying.
And that this medium called it a harpy, and I think that was, I looked up what that meant. It's like, but it's like half, it's like some sort of like demonic, like half female, half something or other, like a winged beast of some kind that, feeds off of people. But I think the essence of that is that she saw it as something non-human, right? That it was something outside of the normal realm of, hauntings or whatever like that. And that it was like feeding off her. Pretty scary stuff. But yeah, that's the story of Isabella Perimsky and Emily.
Wow.
So
that's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
It's like something out of a movie.
Yeah, they actually did do, that's another paranormal witness episode. I think it's like the first one. Like it's pretty scary though. Like
yeah.
Anyways, cool. Wow. So do you wanna do
yeah, I just have a short one, but
sure.
mine is another one provided. It's like sourced by people that I know. So this is a friend of mine, and this took place some years ago. It was an experience that his mother had. So she lived in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, which, if anyone's familiar with it, it's a very rural area. I was born there, lived the first 14 years of my life. Yeah. So it's just very, heavily wooded, forested area with wolves and, it's very, very rural and untouched, largely untouched. So she lived there in an area near a lake, surrounded by woods. And the neighbors, she had neighbors, but they weren't situated too close. The houses, there was a lot of land in between. So one day she was home all by herself. She lived there with her husband at the time. And she heard the noise of like a door closing or opening in the opposite side of the house, which was strange.
Right.
She probably didn't have the windows open or anything like that. So she goes to investigate it, and it's near her home office area. She entered the office, and encountered what she described as a child-sized, very thin being with translucent skin.
Whoa.
That was kind of alien looking.
Whoa.
And her immediate feeling was that she'd startled it because it was like cowering in the room and trying to cover its face, like, you're not supposed to see me.
Whoa.
She had a sense that the thing was like either sick or very afraid, but somehow it was like giving off these vibes of feeling vulnerable and threatened. She made eye contact with it, and at that moment, something happened to her brain, because she said that she felt like her thoughts were disrupted in some way to distract her from what she was seeing. And by the time she regained her senses, the being was gone, but she was in an entirely different room of the house, and she'd lost a significant amount of time. So there's been this lapse in time. And my friend doesn't remember how much time, but quite a bit, enough
Right.
to be noticeable. And she also had a couple cats, and they seemed very upset. So they experienced something in the house.
Right. So if she had like, oh, this was all in her head, like still
Right.
her cats were visibly shaken, which, yeah.
Right. And then this is also worth mentioning. So other people in the area, including her husband, had seen UFO-like lights in the sky. And that'll be for another episode, but basically there'd been like kind of like UFO reports in the area.
Wow. Oh, crazy.
So I have no idea what this thing was.
Well, I mean,
I knew her.
Uh-huh.
She didn't have any other stories like this. This was the one that I heard about.
Yeah, I mean,
don't
that's
know.
interesting because, like, I was saying earlier, like, we were talking about, like, the sort of credibility of the witnesses. Like, if I had a UFO experience and I always think about, like, if anything like that ever happened to me and I tried to tell people, they'd be like, yeah, right. But, like, the fact that it's this person in the UP who's never really, had other experiences like that. It's this one night. It's so out of place in their sort of worldview that in and of itself to me kind of lends credibility. You know what I mean? Like she definitely experienced something. Why would she have this weird memory? That's such an odd. It's not like seeing a figure out of the corner of your eye and like, what was that? And it's gone. But that she walked into this room and it's
she had some kind of experience that she believed happened, it
Right.
felt very real to her. So either it did happen or there was something going on with her mind or some drugs she was taking, or like she was on some kind of medication that it's, who knows. But she wasn't someone who, talked about this kind of thing. It was, her son told me about it, and it was a one-time thing.
Yeah, I feel like with stories like this, it's like, we look at them like when it's something that doesn't really fit in with the worldview or the current sort of scientific view, like we dismiss them. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's such a shame. There's something so unscientific about that to me, that there's a value of evaluating these experiences based solely on their face content. Do you know what I mean? Like literally that she had an experience and this was what it was, to try to dismiss it or say she didn't have it, or that it was like all in her head. There's something unscientific about that to me. You know what I mean? It's like the St. Elmo's fire and those ball lightning and stuff. I mean, I feel like there was a time when like they were talking about like, oh, ball lightning is not really a thing. That people don't actually see that. And then a few years later, they're like, oh yeah, it's this like natural phenomenon where, it's like, until they can simply explain it, there's this like animosity towards the unexplained.
Right.
Which it's a shame because it stops us from looking more deeply and more seriously into them as a people. But it's also like, but it's interesting, but that people still have these experiences. Do you know what I mean? Even if someone was like, oh, well, that didn't happen to your friend, she'd be like, well, yeah, it did. Like, if I saw this, can you tell me, what did it look like again? I'm
Okay.
like obsessed with this,
Okay.
dude. I love this story.
Okay. She said it was like, okay. So it was like a child-sized being,
Child size.
but
Okay.
not a child.
Right.
Very thin, and it had translucent skin.
So it's not wearing anything? Like it's not like...
You know what? I don't know.
But
I'd
enough
have
of
to,
it is exposed
probe
that it's... right,
probe,
translucent
so to
skin.
speak, for further information from my friend, but kind of alien looking. And I think that was kind of like, you know, one of the things that they speculated about. Oh, this could be like an alien sort of a thing. But also, she was very deeply religious. Had a strong religious faith. She's passed on now, but so I think she was kind of like, well, maybe this was something like an evil entity, you know, something like that. But you know, it was just it went unexplained.
Right. Yeah, well,
But it was,
clearly she
but
saw
the
something.
the fact that it was like cowering and trying to cover its face, and
Well, I mean, you flip it around, like you think, okay, you're on a planet exploring, you know,
right,
and you know these people are violent, you know, and they're giants compared to you,
right,
if you're the size of a child in comparison to an adult, and you're like, these people are stupid, they're unpredictable, and they're violent. Like, you'd probably be freaked out too. Like, if
Right.
you were in like one of their houses, like who knows what it was doing in there, but
yeah, in her home office in the UP. I don't know.
it was in her home office. Is that what
It was in her home office. Yeah.
Whoa, crazy. I love that story. Well, that's a great one to finish out, I think, that category, because, yeah, like, who knows what all this phenomena stuff is? You know, is it like terrestrial entities? Is it the influence of extraterrestrial beings? You know, like, we don't know. Like,
Elves, gnomes, woodland sprites. Yeah.
all I imagine is that, like, this world, or this entire universe is teeming with life, you know, and it's life of all kinds. And, you know, I think Carl Sagan, you know, talks about how, like, I think even, you know, talks about how, you know, when we look out into the universe, you know, at the possibility of other life, we're already narrowing it down in our minds to carbon-based, cellular-based beings, right?
Right.
Whereas I think even Stephen Hawking talks about this, like, you know, if there are other, you know, intelligent life out there, which there probably is, it would come in so many different varieties. You know what I mean? Like, on a gas planet, what would you know, it's not going to have a normal body. Like, you know, it might have a gaseous body, or do you know what I mean? Like, all the types of you know, we know that that nature has an intelligence. You know, we even know in this world that we accept the fact that there are invisible beings that can kill us, right? AKA germs, diseases. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But what we can't stand the thought of is that they're as smart as us or as tall as us. You know, like, we'll accept any other version, but just not that. Anyways.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that was great. I feel like we've come to the end here. Do you feel good about this episode?
Yeah, I
Me
do
too.
feel good. Yeah, I think we covered a lot of ground. And,
We did, definitely. Yeah.
There's obviously more to explore with the ghost categories.
Yes.
But yeah, feel pretty good. These
Cool.
are some great stories.
Cool. All right. So I guess until next time.
All right. I'll see you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Shadowland Podcast is produced by Seth Jablon and Christina Callett. Edited by Tim Kelly. Theme music by Tim Lincoln.
Thanks, Tim.